In the spirit of we're getting ready for the Jewish High Holy Days, we'll be celebrating the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, very shortly. We're going to be studying today the story of the binding of Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, and all the midrash and folklore and ideas and legends that go around that idea, that story of the binding of Isaac. So, we read the binding of, the reason why is many of you will know that we read that story, that part of the Torah, on Rosh Hashanah. Anybody know why we read that story on Rosh Hashanah? Let me read it to you real quick. Give everybody a little bit of a reminder. Okay. So this is Genesis 20:21. And it came to pass after these things that God did prove Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son, whom thou lovest, even Isaac, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he cleaved the wood for the burnt offering, and he rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship and come back to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they both went together. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called out unto him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know thou art a God-fearing man, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Adonai Yireh, as it is said unto this day, In the mount where the Lord is seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham a second time out of heaven, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast hearkened to my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. And it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, and it goes on with the future generations. So that's the story. I just read it to you in 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And it's probably one of the most pivotal stories in the narrative of the Torah, of the Jewish Bible. Now that I reminded you of it, anybody have any ideas? Why do we read this story on the Jewish New Year on Rosh Hashanah?
The shofar to remind us.
Okay, what's the shofar, which is the ram's horn, And on Rosh Hashanah, we have the custom of blowing the ram's horn in liturgy, in services.
Unquestioning belief.
Unquestioning belief that you come before God in full faith, unquestioning belief, ready to do whatever God should ask of you, even the most horrible thing you could think of, to kill your own child. Any other ideas why we read it?
To remind everybody there's a covenant.
Yes. So why do you say that? That's really good. It's a little deeper than the obvious.
What you said?
To remind everyone of the covenant is what she said.
It's a good time to remind everybody of the covenant at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. And there's parallels too. A knife, a circumcision knife, a father circumcising the son, a father sacrificing the son. There are all kinds of parallels. But as we know from what we've talked about before, when it comes to Midrash, Agadah, to Jewish legend, it all starts by filling in the blanks that are not there in the actual story. So here we have the...
What about the blessing? Usually you give a blessing to your family with the new year, and he was blessing his son.
You're right. That's another good point. After the angel said, "Don't kill Isaac," he did bless his son, and we do bless our family at the new year. Absolutely right. Another correlation.
There are a lot of studies as to what effect this had on his son, because the father was going to kill him, and I think it's affected him throughout his life.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly getting into what we're going to talk about today, which is the Midrash Agadah, the pieces behind the story that are not actually in the Bible itself. So, anybody have any embellishments on the story that you know from your childhood or what you learned that I did not read right out of the Torah just now? Anybody have any memories from growing up? Something that they might have learned about this story that was not part of the Torah? Where was Sarah? Where was Isaac's mother? Let's start at the beginning with the mother. Well, no, my feminist leanings.
Isaac didn't know what God was doing, and that he was testing his father. He didn't even know. He just thought he was with his father.
Yeah, that's one interpretation. So, the Torah says, and it came to pass that after these things, they're fighting with the Philistines, God comes to Abraham and says, take your son, your only son. Now we know that Abraham actually had another son, right? Ishmael, who he sent away with his handmaiden, Hagar. He says, your only son, Isaac. Never a mention of his mother, of Sarah. How old was Isaac at the time?
No, the point was that Sarah passed away when she heard the news that he was
Well,
going to be
all right,
sacrificed.
so we're getting to some of the Midrash. So Sarah, the Midrash says, the legend around it says, first of all, anybody know how old Isaac was by this time? Abraham was 127. How old was Abraham when Isaac was born? Okay, so what? If Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born, it was 127 when this happened. Isaac was not a little kid. He was a young man already. He was 27. Now, different Midrash portray him in different ways. Sometimes we see Isaac portrayed as very young. Sometimes we see him portrayed as the young man. It's all goes into the Midrash, into the legends, into how it's being interpreted in any given, or by any given rabbis or any given cultural group. So Sarah, back to Sarah. The legends say, the backstory says, that Abraham went to Sarah because she's gonna wonder, all right, where's my husband and my son going off to? They're packing up, they're going off, they're bringing a couple of servants with them. Where are they going? They could be going hunting, they could be going visiting, they could be doing all kinds of things, out to survey the flocks. Abraham says to her, and this is legend, it's not in the Torah, I didn't just read this to you. The legend is that Abraham says to her, it's time, I learned Torah. Remember how Abraham learned Torah? We talked about it last week, in the cave when he was 3 years old. Abraham learned the Torah when he was a toddler. So he says, I learned Torah at a special place. Now it's time I'm going to take Isaac and I'm going to teach him. It's time for Isaac to learn. So Sarah doesn't suspect a thing. All right? The other piece of it, Abraham chops the wood. He's 127. And it says in the Torah he chopped the wood to take with him. Wouldn't Sarah wonder, why is he chopping wood and taking wood?
One question. Was there a Torah? There was no official Torah until Moses came in.
That's right.
So what was he studying? The guy just figured out that there's only one God. You're saying that he was studying.
Right, because Torah also metaphorically means the way. It means the way to live, the understanding of the world. And another Midrash Agadah, another legend says is that Torah, even though it was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and until then there wasn't a written down Torah, it always was there, and Abraham was one of those people who knew Torah. That's a mystical Midrash. That's what they think. That is. So it's time for Isaac to learn it. It's a secret. It's not like in the days after Moses where you can open up the scroll and read the Torah. He has to take his son. So Sarah believed that. As they're going, the legend also says, who were the two men that accompanied them? It says Abraham took two of his young men with him. Who were they? Servants. They were servants. They don't say who they were, but Midrash, the legend says that one was Eliezer, who was his trusted servant, and the other was actually Ishmael. Now, they're walking along, and Abraham asked God, how will I know the place where you want me to, how will I know the place? And God says to him, you'll know. When you get there, you'll know. You'll see my glory at the place. So the legend says Abraham's walking, and he and Isaac see it from afar. They see it from afar. And they actually see Mount Moriah. And Mount Moriah in the legend said to Abraham's eyes, he could see the holy cloud over the mountain and the Shekhinah, God's light, emanating from the mountain. When he turned and asked Isaac, what do you see? Isaac said, I see the mountain with the glory of God, God's holy cloud, and the Shekhinah, the holy light emanating from the mountain. When he turned to the two men, Eliezer and Ishmael, he said, what do you see? And they said, what do you mean? We just see desert, with more and more mountains in front of us. So that's another part of the legend that lets us know about the holiness of Abraham and Isaac. Leading up to the binding of Isaac, there's also legend that says Sarah gave birth to Isaac when? Was she young? 25? Just the right time to have a baby? She was 90. She was an old woman. So a lot of the legend, a lot of the Midrash Agadah actually assigns Isaac's birth as a divine conception, and the rabbis argue that and use certain parts of the text to make their point by saying things like, let's see. I just want to find the part. Okay, so this is Genesis 17, and God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai thy wife, this is right after he told him to do the circumcision and he made the covenant with Abraham. This is a continuation of the covenant story that we talked about last week. And God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. and I will bless her, and moreover, I will give thee a son of her. I will give thee a son of her, and yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, kings of peoples shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear? And Abraham said unto God, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, nay, but Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, for his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. So 2 things there. The rabbis from that little bit of it created a midrash that's in the Talmud that suggests that God, that Sarah had immaculate conception, basically, that God is the real father of Abraham, and that because God caused a woman of 90 to give birth, it could be nothing short of miraculous. And the other thing is that God named Abraham, which is another reason why that rabbis made the midrash, the idea that God is the real father of Isaac, because God said, a year from now, Sarah's going to have a son, and his name's going to be Isaac. I'm telling you, that's his name. In Hebrew, his name is Yitzchak, and Yitzchak means laughter. Both Sarah and Abraham laughed when they heard at their age that they were going to have a child. Inside, they didn't believe it. So from that, the rabbis extrapolated the Midrash Haggadah, the legend, that Isaac was really of a divine birth, and that God actually named Isaac. So when he asked Abraham to take him to be sacrificed, was it really a sacrifice? Because you see, the story, if God was Isaac's true father, he would just be coming back to heaven to be with God. So this is the way that the rabbis take.
I had heard in Midrash that Isaac knew what would happen, and that he told Abraham, "Bind me, because I will want to run away."
Yep, I'm getting to that. Yes, but you're right. You're absolutely right. So there is all kinds of midrash, but it's such a horrible thing. People could not swallow this. The ancient rabbis, the ancient sages, when they read it, were like, that has to be wrong. Why would God want Abraham to sacrifice and kill Isaac when he promised Isaac? This is the great dichotomy. One, the killing of your own son and human sacrifice, unthinkable in Judaism. 2, God promised that Isaac was going to be a great nation and carry on Abraham's seed and multiply and make the nation of the Jewish people. So how could that possibly be? So these backstories that Isaac was actually really the son of God. And then what happens is that Isaac does know. The Midrash says, the Talmud says Isaac did know. He wasn't stupid. He was 27 years old. Even if he was...
That comes from the Posner, Vayehu Shnei Miachtav. So Rashi says, B'lei v'echad, with one heart.
Right.
That he knew.
He knew with one heart because his heart, he was directly tied in with God. So the Midrash says is that Abraham and Isaac were walking, and as they're walking, Isaac says, well, Dad, what are you going to do? How are you going to tell Mom about this? And he says, I'm doing this willingly. He says, it's all right. I know what's going on. I'm there. I understand. It's okay by me. But what are we going to do about Mom? Because when she hears about this, it's going to kill her. And the Midrash says that actually is what killed Sarah. That when she found out what had happened, but we'll get to that. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So they're walking in the forest, and he says, what are you going to do? And he says, well, I guess we'll figure it out. I'll figure out something to tell your mother. And And as they're walking, they're talking. And just like Isaac could see God's glory in the mountain, it said that when they got to the place where Isaac was to be sacrificed, Isaac lay down on the stone and he said to his father, tie me up tight because I don't want to involuntarily, I want to do this, I'm with you, I understand, but I'm still human, and when I see the knife, I'm going to flinch, and I don't want to flinch. I want to go the way I'm supposed to go. So Abraham really ties him up really good to the rock so he can't move. Isaac before that had even helped his father lay the wood for the fire. He's laying there, and the Midrash says that as Isaac was laying there and looking up, the whole of the heavens opened up to him. And he could see all of heaven, all the angels, God waiting for him, the Shekhinah, the holy light, and he was not afraid of being sacrificed because he knew he was just going to belong there. It wasn't. But while the angels were watching, they were horrified. Now, how did this all happen to begin with? So as I said, the rabbis couldn't wrap their heads around why would God ask him to do this? So of course they have to come up with something. Anybody know why? It's a theme that goes in other stories. What? To taste. That the most common idea is it was a test of his faith, and yes, it was. Where else in the Bible is there a test of faith? Not the Abraham story. Other tests of faith. Moses.
When he strikes the rock and he wasn't supposed to.
He strikes the rock and he wasn't supposed to. Somebody else I'm thinking of who lost everything. Job. Job as a test of faith. So the rabbis say, the Job story. Who was behind that? Satan. Satan challenged us. Satan is one of God's angels, remember. He's an angel. God is good, but encompasses all aspects. So Satan is the angel that encompasses the evil inclination. And Satan says to God, according to the Midrash, hey, God, here you have this Abraham. You told him you're going to make him a great nation. Prove it. I dare you. So the Midrash says is that God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac as a test of faith, but on a dare from Satan. And that along the way, as Abraham and Isaac were walking together, Satan appeared to them. And first he appears to Abraham as an old man like himself. And he says, hey, old man, where are you going? Why are you doing this? Isaac is your most beloved son. How could you even think of that? Run! What's the matter with you? Schlepping wood across the desert. Get out, don't do this. And Abraham says, get out of here. I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone. First test. So then Satan's like, well, that didn't work. I couldn't get Abraham to abandon this plan.
The Midrash talks about Satan, but in the Bible they don't mention Satan.
No, that's what Midrash is. Midrash is the backstory, the filling in of the details that the rabbis came up with ideas and stories of why would these things be? What's the explanation? So it's an intellectual spinning. It's the spin doctor spinning of the tale.
And they also contradict too. They say that Isaac didn't know that I was going to be a test, and yet the Midrash talks differently.
Right, because the Midrash is trying to make us understand or come to understandings of why this would be. Why would God ask for such a horrible thing? So the Midrash are the stories, the backstories that the rabbis supposed, extrapolated from the text in order to help us to understand the story and what might the back motivations would be. Because the Bible itself is pretty sparse in terms of, description and text. It says, Abraham, go do this. It doesn't say why. So the rabbis tried to figure out, and that's the Midrash. That's what makes up Haggadah and Talmud. So,
the question is this. When we learn that God is omnipotent, omniscient, the Midrash, which he's saying was produced by rabbis, it seems to make God in a kind of human kind of form, not this omnipotent, omniscient.
Yes. And that is a crux of Jewish belief. That's where the idea of Israel comes from, because in Judaism we believe that humans are in partnership with God. Our covenant is a partnership. Not that we're equal to God, because he's the big guy, but that we're in partnership, it's a covenant, and that humans wrestle with God. The word Israel means wrestles with God. And so it is wrestling with God, because blind faith is just blind faith.
I had heard also a rabbi explain that test differently. What he said was that God knew what Abraham would do, but Abraham didn't know. So this was to show Abraham how strong his faith was.
Yes, that's another midrash. This particular story, in Hebrew it's called the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. We could do a whole semester on this one story. There is so much. So I'm encapsulating it into today. But yes, that's another very important explanation of why this is. So back to Satan. So Satan appears to Abraham as the old man. Abraham tells him to get lost. Then the Midrash says Satan appears to Isaac as a young man, the way Isaac is, and says to him, "What are you doing? You're going with your father. Don't you know you're the lamb? You're the one that's going to be..." And Isaac says, "I know. It's okay. Get out of here." So Satan's like, "Darn, I don't know, I can't get these guys." So then the Midrash says that Satan actually turns himself into a river, another obstacle, a river. And Abraham and Isaac wade into the river up to their necks. Again, shades of the Red Sea parting. A lot of things, you'll see a lot of cross references up to their necks before God causes the river to Satan to dry up and says, "Enough of this. They're not going to, be deterred from the task." So if Isaac is laying there bound on the altar, and he sees the holy light, and Abraham is ready to do it. He's trembling. He doesn't want to do it. And the Midrash says that he was crying so hard he couldn't even see. That he was trembling and crying and racked with sobbing, but he had the knife in his hand and he was ready to do it. And from the heavens, an angel calls down. God tells the angel, tell Abraham not to do this. And another midrash, and in the Torah, the angel calls down and says, "Abraham, Abraham, don't do this." But in the midrash, it says that the angel, who is Gabriel, turns to God and says, "You tell him. You're the one who started all the shenanigans. You should be the one to tell him." In the end, the angel listens to God, of course, and says, "Don't do this," and turns around. He finds the ram stuck in the thicket, and another midrash says is that ram was an original creature from the Garden of Eden and had been waiting for this moment, had been created and waiting for this moment. And so Abraham finds the ram, sacrifices the ram instead, and they go on their way. Now, the Torah says Abraham went back. It doesn't say anything about Isaac going back. The Torah says, let's see. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together towards Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. What happened to Isaac? Okay, wait, we can't hear. What did he do?
Stayed on the mountain for about 3 years.
Yes, that's the midrash, that he stayed on the mountain for 3 years, and while he stayed there, he absorbed it, he studied, he learned, until he felt prepared to go back.
So he did what the father.
He did what the father did. He stayed away for 3 years. And also it is said that when Abraham lifted the knife to kill Isaac, Satan appeared to Sarah and told her what was going on. And in that instant, Sarah died. That's how the Midrash explains that how she died. That Satan went and told her, and she was so horrified, in that instant she died. So it's a powerful story. And like I said, we could talk about this story. We could do a whole semester
Why
course.
did Satan tell that to Sarah? Did he want her to die? Did he do it to torture her? Did he do it so she would step in and do something? What was his point? All of the
above. Okay, in the end, the rabbis say it was Sarah's time. She was, after all, she was 110. Or no, she was 117. So, the rabbis say it was her time, but Satan is he's the evil angel. His motivation was to hurt her, and he was also foiling God, that, all right, I didn't get Isaac, but I'm going to get Sarah. Okay?
Did he tell her that Abraham did kill him?
Yes.
I thought.
Well, what he said to her, what the Midrash says, is that Satan said to her, you know where your husband and your son are right now? Your son is tied up to a rock on Mount Moriah, and your husband has a knife to his neck, and he's going to sacrifice him to God.
That's a bit of news.
Okay?
She took it.
Right. Well, it was true, but
He didn't actually say that he did kill him.
he didn't say he killed him. He said, this is what's going on, right? He made the implication. He didn't tell her otherwise that Isaac survived. Now, there are some...
By the way, Sarah was 127.
I said, I want to go see.
127.
She was 120, but Abraham was 127 and she was
Look in the
90.
next section of Chaye Sarah. They tell you how old she was when she died.
Okay, so another dichotomy then, because in that parsha, Abraham is 127 when he takes Isaac. So if he's 127, she's 117. He was 10 years older. But I mean, just.
She just accepted this. She didn't want to go and look and see for herself.
She died. She had a heart attack. She died. And the news. She was an old woman, and they were traveling in the desert.
Me personally, I'm going to this.
But remember, they were traveling for several days, she was, she was an old woman.
There were no buses, right?
And plus, she died on the spot, is what the Midrash says. So,
Wasn't Satan Lucifer at that time, or was that?
the Midrash just calls him Satan. Yeah. So,
Wouldn't the interpretation be that she wanted to go up to heaven to be with Isaac?
could be. Yes.
I know it's not exactly, but is that where 120 years come from? Is it
That comes from Moses' life. Okay, so it is interesting because it says here Abraham was 127 when he did that. So I have to look that up and
Look at
study.
Chaye Sarah, the next section.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. It's just another. I'm intrigued now. I got to look it up.
It's just that these numbers all the time, and I always question it. They're not the numbers I think that we know as the numbers. I don't know. It just
The calendar may be.
I always find it.
It said that they lived to be 127.
The way they kept days, a day, was different. In other words, their way of the calendar was different than the way we do it today. Instead of 365 days, it could have been.
Yeah, it could have been shorter than 365 days.
Also, in the Torah it says, Avram Zokain Bo Bayomim. So Rashi said it was the first time that age became, that people got older. Up until his time, people really didn't become old. Abraham asked for old age, because he says, when I walk with my son, they don't know who's the father, they don't know who's the son. It says, you have to do respect. So God says, okay, you'll become old. It says, Avram Zokain Bo Bayomi. The first time that Zokain, Ziknus.
Where is that? Is that Midrash or it's in a...
No, it's in the Torah.
Torah.
Avram Zokain Bo Bayomi. But Hashem Berach is Avram Bakol. and God blessed Abraham with everything.
Okay.
It's in this.
All right. So did everybody hear that? No. All right. So Abraham was the first person to grow old. That Rashi, who was a medieval rabbi, explains the aging as that before Abraham, people didn't really grow old. That Abraham specifically asked God to grow older so that he would have due respect. That when he was walking with his sons and with younger men, people wouldn't know the difference. So Abraham asked God for old age. What a blessing, right?
Oh, yeah. By the way, the reason they look the same, the father and the son, because a lot of people question maybe she was born from, got a son, she had sexual relations with Abimelech,
right,
with one of the kings. So this is the reason when he was born, looked exactly like his father.
Yes, and that is actually also another part of the story. I didn't go into all that about with Isaac's birth, but it is said that Isaac was born looking exactly like his father, so that there would be no doubt as to who his father was. Even though some of the Midrashim say that God was his father, because Sarah had if you recall the stories of her going with Egypt and being said that she was his sister and all that, we're not going to get into all of that, but there was not going to be any aspersion or doubt that Isaac was Abraham's son. So God made sure that Isaac looked exactly like Abraham. Okay, so a very powerful story. And how does somebody get over that? Being laid out on an altar, bound up, about to be sacrificed by your father, seeing heaven, being saved by an angel. How does this affect a person? What?
I'm thinking that if he was accepting of this in the first place, that it was as it was to be, and he would be.
He'd be okay. It was his test of faith, but he might have been a little shaken by it.
Yeah,
You could be shaken by a test of faith.
There's a lot of theory that says that a lot of his afterwards, his psychological, was determined by what happened in that event.
Well, in the Bible, we don't know too much about Isaac. We know about how he was conceived. We know this story of the Akedah, where he's going to be sacrificed, the binding of Isaac. And we know the story of how he meets Rebekah, how Eliezer goes and brings him back Rebekah for his wife. And then the next thing we know, he's an old man, and we have the story of his sons, right? So we don't know too much of the backstory of Isaac.
Basically, he's quiet and meditative.
He's quiet and meditative, yes. And the rabbis give him that attribute, that he's quiet, meditative, studious. Right, and Rebekah was a very good woman. We're going to talk about them another day. But that story of the Akedah, I gave you some handouts. Let me just check the time. The story of the Akedah has really held people's imaginations and attentions over the millennia. So it's a theme that is used many, many times and comes up in many, many more, throughout time, from medieval plays to modern day poetry and themes. That theme of the Father, Son, and the sacrifice is played out so many times. One of the themes is, I gave you a handout here, and it says the parable of the old man and the young. This is a poem by Wilfred Owen, and it was written, I wrote it down, it was written in 1910. What happened? What was going on in the world at that time? World War I. One of the, a horrible, bloody war where so many young men were sacrificed. I'm sorry?
It was the preamble.
Yes, it was the preamble. So, here's the poem, okay, by Wilfred Owen. The Parable of the Old Man and the Young. So Abram rose and clave the wood and went, and took the fire with him and a knife. And as they sojourned both of them together, Isaac the firstborn spake and said, My father, behold the preparations, fire and iron. But where the lamb for this burnt offering? Then Abram bound the youth with belts and straps, and builded parapets and trenches there, and stretched forth the knife to slay his son. When lo, an angel called him out of heaven, saying, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything to him. Behold, a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. Offer the ram of pride instead of him. But the old man would not so, but slew his son and half the seed of Europe, one by one. So, this Wilfred Owen took the biblical story of the sacrifice of Isaac and made it into a parable for World War I and sacrificing the young men. The idea that, the bindings were belts and straps. The poetic interpreters say this is their uniform. Soldiers' uniforms have belts and straps and things like that. Parapets and trenches, obvious allusion to war. Stretched forth the knife to slay his son. Was said, no, don't do it. But in the end, went ahead and did it. And it would not offer the ram of pride, because World War I was a war of pride, right? It was stupid reason, as a lot of wars are. And then the old man didn't do it, but slew his son and half the seed of Europe, one by one. So Wilfred Owen takes the biblical story, powerful story, and uses it to tell the story of a modern sacrifice. Next one, Highway 61.
What nationality was he?
I'm sorry?
What nationality?
He was British, Wilfred Owen. Highway 61, Revisited. This is a song by Bob Dylan. Anybody know Bob Dylan's real name?
Zimmerman.
Robert Zimmerman. Robert Zimmerman. He was a Jewish guy. He is a Jewish guy. He's still alive and he's Jewish. He has had lots of. He converted at one point, but he has returned to Judaism. I'm sorry? Zimmerman. Robert Zimmerman. Bob Dylan was Robert Zimmerman. So, this is a song that he wrote, and the very first stanza of Highway 61. Now, Highway 61 is a road in the South, and it was famous for a lot of, there were actually car accidents and things that happened. I don't remember who it was, but a jazz musician was killed on Highway 61. And it's in the South, so the South has other implications for civil rights movement. And here's this paragraph, Bob Dylan. Oh, God said to Abraham, kill me a son. We have to do it in Bob Dylanese. I can't do the voice. Abe says, man, you must be putting me on. God say, no. Abe say, what? God say, you can do what you want, Abe, but the next time you see me coming, you better run. Well, Abe says, where do you want this killing done? And God says, out on Highway 61. And the song goes on, but it's a song about civil rights and sacrifices along the civil rights movement. And then in the back, if you turn the page over, you have the rest of the Highway 61 song, but then there's a Hebrew poem, and the back of that is the translation. It's Yerusha, heritage. And this is a poem by a Hebrew poet in the early days of the state of Israel named Chaim Guri. Chaim Guri was, well, I'm going to read the poem to you first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Chaim Guri. Heritage. The ram came last of all, and Abraham did not know that it came to answer the boy's question, first of his strength when his day was on the wane. The old man raised his head. Seeing that it was no dream and that the angel stood there, the knife slipped from his hand. The boy, released from his bonds, saw his father's back. Isaac, as the story goes, was not sacrificed. He lived for many years, saw what pleasure had to offer, until his eyesight dimmed. But he bequeathed that hour to his offspring. They are born with a knife in their hearts.
You know, you could like almost make all of Jewish sacrifice that's gone on through all the years come back to that sacrifice, even what's happening in Israel.
That's exactly Chaim Gori's point. That's exactly Chaim Gori's point. That all throughout the years, the Jewish people represent Isaac, and always almost at the end, almost always ready to be sacrificed, and throughout keeping faith and being willing, and still keeping faith, even in the face of something like the Holocaust. And Chaim Gori was a Holocaust survivor. And he ended up in Israel, but he wrote this poem, and it's exactly for that reason. It was a poem about the Holocaust, but if you read it, you see all of Jewish history, and the persecutions and the sacrifices that are in Chaim Gori's poem here. It's a beautiful poem. But
the first poem that you read, I don't have the handout, but I think it said that Isaac was actually sacrificed.
In the first poem, yeah, Wilfred
and,
Owen.
And therefore all of the future generations were not born. So
Right.
it comes to my mind that maybe that's meant as a comfort that this is not really happening now.
What do you
During
mean?
the beginning of World War II, like this, it's a poetic illusion of the idea that what we're seeing now is not really happening. Really, these people were never born.
Maybe.
It's just a
Yeah.
big,
I mean, that's what poems are. Poems, a good poem will make you think and
Right.
interpret it in the way that it fits for you,
If you say
right?
that he actually was sacrificed, then all of these generations were not born.
Right,
So this war is not really happening.
right.
So we're all really close.
So what I think about this poem, you're right, and but this poem, Heritage, the line that always gets me is the boy released from his bonds saw his father's back. Right? His father. What does that mean? What do you think?
Walking away.
Yeah, maybe. So either the father was walking away because he couldn't face his son after all of that, or the son didn't want to look, also couldn't look forward. I mean, it's a painful story. And it's a story, the reason why we have all this midrash, all these legends, all these poems. And in addition to these poems, there's an opera written by Benjamin Britten that's about Isaac and Abraham, the sacrifice. It's called The Five Canticles and Three Purcell Realizations, written by Benjamin Britten in 1952. And it's a whole opera. It actually was performed last year in Brooklyn about Abraham and Isaac. And I had asked Neshama, I wanted to bring the YouTube to show you the opera singing. So there's opera, there's dance, there's so many movies and times that you could think about this father-son relationship. What does it mean? Where has it, what's going on with it? That it's an amazingly rich source. And I want to end, let's see if we have time. Yep. I want to end with a Hasidic story. So this is a story of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. What?
No, Breslov.
Breslov, I'm saying it wrong? Okay, you got to correct me when I say it. It's fine. I'm going to read it to you. It's a very famous story. You probably, many of you might recognize it. And then let's talk about why I picked this story to be one to represent the Akedah. Okay? This is called The Boy's Song. How the enemy, continuing the battle, spread his iron wings over the earth, and how the wings were pierced. The enemy did not forswear the battle, but came out openly and spread his iron wings between the heaven and earth. The wings were as thick as a mountain is high, and all through they were made of heavy iron. He wrapped his wings around the earth as he would enclose it within the 2 cups of his hand. On earth all was darkness. The wings of the enemy pressed forever closer to the earth and crushed the spirits of men. When Rabbi Israel was about to enter into a synagogue, he stopped outside the door and said, "I cannot go in there. There is no room for me to enter." But the Hasidim said, "There are not many people in the synagogue." "The house is filled from the ground to the roof with prayers," said the master. But as he saw the Hasidim taking pride because of his words, he said, "Those prayers are all dead prayers. They have no strength to fly to heaven. They are crushed. They lie one on top of the other. The house is filled with them." And he returned to Medzibuz. Did I say that right? Medzibuz. He felt the weight of the wings of the enemy pressing ever closer upon him. He sought for a way to pierce that iron cloud and make a path to heaven. Not far from Medzibuz there lived a Jewish herdsman. This man had only one son. The boy was 12 years old, but was so slow-witted that he could not remember the alphabet. For several years the Jew had sent his son to the cheder, to school, but as the boy could not remember anything, the father ceased to send him to the school and instead sent him to the fields to mind the cows. The boy took a reed and made himself a flute, and sat all day long in the grass playing upon his flute. But when the boy reached his 13th birthday, his father said, "After all, he must be taught some shred of Jewishness." So he said to the lad, "Come, we will go to the synagogue for the holidays." He got in his wagon and drove his son to Medzibuz and bought him a cap and new shoes. And all that time, David carried his flute in his pocket. His father took him to the synagogue of Rabbi Israel. They sat together among the other men. The boy was very still. Then the moment came for the prayer of Musaf to be said. David saw the men all about him raise their little books and read out of them in praying, singing voices. He saw his father do the same as the other men. Then David pulled at his father's arm. "Father," he said, "I too want to sing. I have my flute in my pocket. I'll take it out and sing." But his father caught his hand. "Be still," he whispered. "Do you want to make the rabbi angry? Be still." David sat quietly on the bench. Until the prayer of Mincha, he did not move. But when the men arose to repeat the Mincha prayer, the boy also rose. "Father," he said, "I too want to sing." His father whispered quickly, "Where have you got your fife?" "Here in my pocket." "Let me see it." David drew out his fife and showed it to his father. His father seized it out of his hand. "Let me hold it for you." David wanted to cry, but was afraid and remained still. At last came the prayer of Ne'ilah. That's the last prayer on Yom Kippur, the very last prayer of the night. The candles burned trembling in the evening wind, and the hearts of the worshippers trembled as the flames of the candles. All through the house was the warmth of holiness and the stillness as before the presence. Then the outspread palms of the rabbi were raised over them, and the words of the 18 benedictions were spoken. The boy could hold back his desire no longer. He seized the flute from his father's hand, set it to his mouth, and began to play his music. A silence of terror fell upon the congregation. Aghast, they looked upon the boy. Their backs cringed as if they waited instantly for the walls to fall upon them. But a flood of joy came over the countenance of Rabbi Israel. He raised his spread palms over the boy David. "The cloud is pierced and broken," cried the master of the name, "and evil is scattered from over the face of the earth." Any of you know that story? So, in general, a rule is a Jewish rule is we don't play musical instruments in synagogue. Some do. In progressive Judaism and Reform and conservative Jews play musical instruments, but Orthodox traditional synagogues, you don't play musical instruments during prayer because musical instruments were used in service in the time of the temple, and it's not thought that you should use the musical instruments until the temple is reestablished, and also because music is a form of creation, and on holy days you're not supposed to create, you're supposed to revel in God's creation. So why did I pick that story, Hasidic story by Reb Nachman, one of the most famous Hasidic masters, to finish up talking about the binding of Isaac? What do you guys think? Or you all think? What do you guys? I'm used to talking to college students. What do you guys think?
Right, thank you.
A child leads the way. So an innocent child, he just wanted to give to God, right? His father was the one who was learned, who was, educated, holy, but the child was, was not able to learn. He was a simple person.
Everybody else was in the synagogue praying that, it's from the book and the shep and we praying. This was truly from the heart.
Right,
This
it
was
came.
not written down. It's not pure. It was pure.
Right, it was pure. It came from, and that's really the reason why I chose it, because it's pure. It's a father-son relationship, the father leading the way, but in the end it was the son who was really the saving grace of the story, right? And I think that that's the same thing as with the Akedah in many ways, that Abraham led the way. He was doing what God wanted him to do. It was a test of faith. But in the end, it was Isaac and Isaac's purity, his pureness and his ability to see into heaven and for heaven to look down upon him, that in the end was the saving grace. Although, like Chaim Gori says, he passed that on to all of us with having that knife over his head.
Now, Gori, what country was he? He was a Holocaust survivor. What?
I'm not sure where in Europe he was from. Ultimately, he lived in Israel.
Thank you.
This is like the song of the drummer boy when he had a gift when Jesus was born. What could he give?
He gave a song. Yeah.
He gave,
the song on the.
Play my drum for you.
Yeah.
And this one, he played a song.
So that goes back to, in all the Abrahamic faiths, how there are lots and lots of cross-references. Lots of cross-references. And I did give you one other handout that we didn't get to today. This is a poem written by a very famous Hebrew poet called Chaim Bialik, Chaim Nachum Bialik. I encourage you to, it also goes along the theme of the Akedah. And into there also with modern Israel. And Bialik was one, just so you know, if you get a chance to read it at home, he was one who really, really wrestled with God. He was raised as being a yeshiva boy, and he became totally secular in his lifetime. And then in his older life, he did come back to having some faith, but he really had a lot of wrestling with God and the idea of if there even was a God. So it's an interesting poem also. So thank you. I'll see you all next week. And
Why are you taking her sessions?
Those are,